Thank you. So good afternoon now, if you're in Central Time. And thank you for joining us today. And for this panel, the title of our panel, oh, I lost it. The title of our panel is Foundations Empowering Action, Fostering Social Equity on the Front Lines. My name is José Irizarry. I serve as a conference co-chair this year for the 21st Annual Social Equity Leadership Conference, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Public Management and Policy at the University of Illinois, Springfield. Today's panel is going to allow our panelists to share the distinctive ways that grant funding is amplifying and supporting marginalized voices in their communities to influence the sustainability and effectiveness of nonprofit, health, and education organizations. From reparations to investing in unique community ecosystems, foundation funding impacts the available solutions to issues faced by communities. Using the lessons learned from our four panelists, an overarching goal of this session is to facilitate transferable learning among attendees and participants. The panelists recognize the importance of walking the talk, as I hope most of you do as well, beyond the solidarity commitments displayed on website mastheads. They are on the front line of social equity, diversity, and inclusion, its movement in this post-pandemic world. Attendees hopefully will realize that they are not alone in championing social equity, and will learn about efforts to sustain social equity, diversity, and inclusion practices that integrate equity both internally and externally. The panelists share a collective agreement that doing their best work most definitely means placing resources in places and people where they have been historically denied. We will start this session with self-introductions from each of the four panelists, followed by a question and answer kind of format style. Throughout the session, please feel free to type in your questions and comments in the chat so that I, as the moderator, can try to synthesize or present them individually if we have time. So would you lead us off with the self-introductions?
No problem. It's always nice to be the last one in and then the first one to talk right after that. I'm Saul Anderson. I'm the president and CEO of the Evanston Community Foundation. Evanston is a community, the first community north of the city of Chicago. Most folks know it for being the home of Northwestern University. And I've been in the role for just about a year. It's my first sort of jump into philanthropy. I've been, for the most part, my career, a community-based nonprofit leader, spending most of my time working on the south side of the city here in Chicago. Spent a lot of time working in communities of color, and I'm excited to be working on this end and trying to uplift the entire field of helping people.
Awesome. Natalie, would you like to go next?
Certainly. My name is Natalie Beck, and I also am in Illinois. I am about 3.5 hours south of Evanston in Decatur. I am the president of a community foundation serving the county of Macon County. And like Saul, very passionate about the work we're doing and excited to share some of that, some wins that we've had, and then some of the challenges that we're experiencing.
Juanita, would you like to go next?
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Juanita Morris, and I am and serve as the coordinator of the Jerry J. Dawson Civic Leadership Institute. And it is an institute that was funded through the Howard G. Buffett Foundation, and about $2.4 million over the course of 8 years. And the task is similar as Natalie and Saul, is to figure out how do we best impact our community and continue to move our community forward. And Luis, I am also, or Jose, I'm also an alum of UIS.
Congratulations, yay, I'm not alone.
Listen,
you. I'm trying to celebrate every win, right? And in my last panel, I was talking about the power of belongingness and not feeling alone. So we are not alone. It's a short version. Maria, would you like to go next?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Maria Pesqueira, I'm the president of the Healthy Communities Foundation. The Healthy Communities Foundation is a health conversion foundation, meaning that we were created from the sale of a local hospital when it was a nonprofit to a for-profit. The foundation, so our focus is very much around serving Western Cook County We're also in Illinois, meaning Cook County is in the state of Illinois, and it includes both the city of Chicago proper as well as suburban. I am a 0.5 immigrant, meaning that I came to this country at the age of 6, or was brought to the country at the age of 6. So not fully a full first generation or recent immigrant, as I wasn't born in this country, but consider myself very much a 0.5er in both the Mexican community and the community I grew up with here in Chicago. I am the proud mother of someone who just graduated with his master's in urban planning and policy. Yes, I'm very, very proud of him. And I happen to be calling in from Miami today for another conference where we're discussing equity in philanthropy as well. So I feel as if I'm kind of I brought this conference to that conference or vice versa. So thank you for this invitation. Thanks.
Well, you guys are awesome. And if our attendees don't know that yet, they will by the end of the session, right? We're going to just jump right into it then, because I want the panelists to have the stage for as long as they can. Maria already started telling us a little bit about her organization, but I'm going to ask all panelists to tell us a little about their organization and what social equity looks like on the streets of our communities and the communities that they serve. Going back in the same order, so would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. So Evanston is, I mean, every community says this, right? We're a very unique community, and yeah, of course, but I'd say specifically relative to other north suburban communities, Evanston is really unique. So the north suburbs of Chicago have wouldn't even say a reputation, it's just true, are some of the wealthier communities, not only in Illinois, but in the entire country. Like Kenilworth, the community just a couple north of us, is one of the 2 or 3 wealthiest communities per capita in the entire United States. So we live amongst people of great wealth and around people of great wealth. And even being in a community with Northwestern University, a very wealthy, distinguished private university, there's a lot of wealth that flows around this community. But Evanston is also one of the few communities kind of historically in the north suburbs where, just to put it plainly, where Black folks were allowed to live historically, right? So you have a lot of historical Black families in particular that lived here early on during the time when they were domestic workers for some of our wealthier northern neighbors. And so it's always had this real dichotomy, and also bordering, the Rogers Park neighborhood of Chicago, which is a neighborhood that is very diverse, also, has its share of poverty and has its share of issues. And so, Howard Street is a border according to the government and according to people who keep all our boundaries, but it's not a border between, human beings, right? And so we have a really sort of distinct and interesting relationship with the surrounding communities. And so social equity for us has been always sort of reckoning with this idea of what it means to be a more diverse community than many of our neighbors, but not a community that has always treated that diversity with the respect that it deserves. And most recently, one of the things that our community has embarked upon in order to rectify that situation is Evanston was the first municipality in the United States to pass reparations. And so we have a reparations program running out of our city government, which makes us, really unique, elite company to elite community putting money into that endeavor. We'll get into more of this, but it has come with its share of challenges and its share of debates and discussions. But then also here at the Evanston Community Foundation, we've built a fund and are partnering with a community group to do some flexible reparations work as well. So we're still fighting the equity fight, I would say, and then jumping into repair, which we can talk a little more about, is not exactly the same as equity, right? Equity and repair are different things that you can't always conflate. And so that's what social equity and the work has looked like in our community. It's been a very interesting time to step into this role, and a very interesting time to just live in Evanston and to kind of experience all of this. So it's been an interesting journey to this point, and I'm excited to share more later this afternoon.
Awesome, thank you, Saul. Natalie, same question. Can you tell us about your organization and what social equity looks like on the streets of our communities?
So our organization is a community foundation serving, so we're a community-based funder. We are medium-sized, I would say. We are the 8th largest in Illinois, but we have 54 million in assets that we manage. And as Juanita will share, Dr. Morris, our city is also home to the Howard Buffett Foundation, which is among the top 40 largest private foundations in the United States. So at the same time, while we have these amazing resources, we also have 22% poverty. We had a national incident here in 1999, which brought a lot of issues to on the racial front. We had rioting. Reverend Jesse Jackson was here. We had students expelled. Just a very bad situation for our city, and I would say it's taken us decades to recover from that. And so our role right now, we're continuing to repair and build bridges, and I think we're seeing great progress. So one of the things we'll come around to later is we now have the most Latino and Black leadership in our nonprofit sector than we've ever had in the history of our city. And so along those fronts, in particular with racial diversity and social equity in that mode, we're seeing great progress.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Natalie. Juanita, would you like to go next?
Oh, well, I'll say that it looks a little different for me. I'm not inside of a foundation. I work more outside in terms of community and students and helping to transition our young folks as well as our adult employers. There's a couple of things though, when we talk about focus on equity and initiatives and social equity in our community, I look at and think about employment and placement. And for me, it's a challenge to sit at the table and talk about employment and placement when there's always two pieces that come up for me. The first piece in our community, we talk a lot about they won't come to work or they're just not here. And the conversation always centers around who's the they that we're talking about, because the statistics will tell us that the they that's unemployed and largely unemployed is African American in our community in Macon County, and in particular in Decatur. And then the second piece of the they is that the numbers bear out that the largest unemployed group is African American men. And so what I want to be sure that we talk about for me in particular in the work is, are we intentional about the conversations that we are having? Because if we're not intentional about the conversations that we are having, then we'll never understand or really seek to understand and solve the problem. I always share with our community in those conversations around equity, when we talk about employment and we talk about education, that I left home for 26 years. And when I came back home for 26 years, I could not get a job in my community. So it didn't matter whether I had an associate's, bachelor's, master's, or PhD, I was absent and missing in employment for my community. And so when I'm thinking about social equity, I'm thinking about being more intentional about truly having the conversations in our community at the tables about who are we talking about and how do we best serve our community here. And the foundation and the work that I do allow me and create a space, even in collaboration with Natalie and the Community Foundation, to start to address some of those exact things that bear out in the data.
Okay, Juanita, I want to follow up on a lot of what you said. That notion of they is, of significant importance. But Maria, same question. Can you tell us a little about your organization and what social equity looks like on the streets of our community?
Great. Yes, thanks, José. Well, the Healthy Communities Foundation, as I mentioned, is a health conversion foundation. What that necessarily means is that we're a foundation that is whose purpose is really to address the health and well-being of our community. We're a private foundation, but kind of function like a community foundation. We don't raise money, but like a community foundation in the sense that we are representing a region. We're place-based. And it's basically a 5-mile radius around the hospital where we were founded, where our corpus was created. And what does social justice look like, or social equity look like? I think of equity, I think of justice, and that we're moving from social equity to justice is what we're trying to move towards. And what it looks like, I want to quickly mention that back in 2018, we did our strategic planning process, and we used the University of Wisconsin's methods of county health rankings to take a look at our region by zip code, looking at, well, what's the health look like for our community? And based on zip code, we placed from the first through the last, and what we found, interestingly enough, the healthiest zip code in our region happened to be bordering on the most western part of our region, one of the healthiest counties in the nation, which is DuPage County. And so based on these rankings, what we found, you could really look at the zip codes and can see the racial and ethnic background of this community. So if we did some heat mapping and some demographic mapping, they correlated very similarly. So what we found is that in the Black and Brown communities in our region, they had amongst the highest health disparities in our region. And so as we looked at immigrant communities and sometimes communities that are seen as invisible, perhaps not so in the pandemic as we think about essential workers, right? That are essential workers, when we think about the invisible communities, we knew before going into the pandemic, had amongst the highest health disparities. So of course, no surprise when we thought of the pandemic in early days and how the pandemic hit communities of color specifically in our region. So when you ask, what does social equity look like in our region? We are moving. What we hope to achieve in our foundation is to move towards full health equity, and that we address them from the social determinants of health as well as the structural determinants of health, so that everyone in our region can live a full, vibrant life and thrive and joyfully, right? That's our goal. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. And I definitely want to come back to, I have a long list of things to come back to, but I'm going to try to stick to the program as best as I can. So I'll come back to this at the end. And again, for the attendees, if you have questions, comments, please feel free to use the chat feature for now. Toward the end, we'll open it up and you can put your camera on or audio and speak and ask your questions if we have time. So the next question that I have is actually for Maria. And a part of it is because I learned some of her story and I think that it's important and significant, and I'd like her to share it. So Maria, who is telling the story, and specifically for you, why do you choose to live in the community that you serve?
Great, thanks. And can I go to José Luis, because I feel
yes,
my dad was José Miguel, and nobody just called him Miguel. It was José Miguel,
yeah,
right?
The Latinos use the middle name, so yeah.
so José Luis, why do I choose to live in the community that I live in? And it's kind of, it's something I hadn't really thought of until I came to work at the Healthy Communities Foundation. That I have lived in the region almost my entire life, and have done so because my parents came to this country, like many immigrants have come to this country for a better life, a better future for their family. And we happened to land, or the place where my parents came was in suburban Cook County, Summit. And people think suburban, they think, ooh, it's wealthy, not necessarily. Just as we look at what does that look like as far as communities go. But I live there because it is where my place of worship is there. It is where when we were looking to move and buy a home, mind you, we used to live one house over from my parents. My husband and I got married. And then when we bought a house 5 blocks away, my mom was truly wondering what she did, that we were moving so far away, 5 blocks. Like, Mom, we could walk to our house. So what would happen is that we moved to this location 5 blocks away, happened to be on literally crosses a geographic boundary that was only 5 blocks away that allowed for my son to have a better public school system, right? And so thinking about even within walking distances, sometimes what that means in a place like the Chicago area, even the school systems change. but I knew that my son could get on his bike and he could ride over to the park where he was on a soccer team that was an amazing, beautiful Polish, half Mexican immigrant soccer team. And by the way, they had code words in each of Spanish and Polish, depending on what community they were playing at. And it was beautiful to see how they shared as children, right? Their ethnic backgrounds and the pride of their ethnic backgrounds. But I think I live in this community because it is thriving. I'm also, we happen to be just a mile down from one of the largest Palestinian communities outside of Palestine, and we get the best Middle Eastern food. We got great Mexican food. I mentioned it's just a thriving region that includes various voices and backgrounds, and full of what I think is the beauty of this nation. How in diversity there is strength, right? And there's also great food.
Latinos do like their food too. But before I move on to the next question, just quickly, how do you think that impacts your work in the community that you serve, living there?
So the question is to me, Jose Luis, how does that
Yes,
change? Yes. So thanks. I think because I'm a community member and I'm thinking about it from a first voice perspective. It isn't a they, it's an us. When we think about what's happening in the environment, it's an us, it's our families, it's our children, it's our neighbors, it's our aunts. Previous to coming to this role, I worked in an organization that worked on gender violence. And I recall speaking to our board that one of the things that was really important to state is that it should never be seen as that gender violence could happen to the other. It's the us. It could happen to anyone. And so from that same frame of reference, our team at the Healthy Communities Foundation all have a lived experience. Whether they live in the region, we all have a lived experience. And that we understand, as well as board members, that it is us, it's our community. And we all want each of us to thrive. And if we think about this, we are unapologetic that we center racial equity in our work. And so being a community member, I understand the importance of working towards health equity means that we need to center anti-Blackness in our work, and we need to address racial equity to achieve health equity. And I see that, I mentioned it from the zip code analysis from the Cook County, the rankings, the data told us what those of us living in the neighborhoods knew all along, right? So I think it is important to have a lived experience. And it's also important to allow for communities to be included in finding solutions to the issues that are most challenging. Thanks.
Thank you. That is awesome. See, I told you guys I needed her to answer that question. So I have a question for you next. So how can organizations bake social equity, diversity, and inclusion into all strategies and leadership initiatives, such as the reparation funds?
Yeah. So I want to preface this by saying I am not a baker. I can do some decent work with a grill or with the smoker, but I think the word bake is actually really interesting because my wife, who is a good baker, tells me that like baking is very exact, right? Like you can't put like an extra little quarter teaspoon of something in, or you get an entirely different cookie or cake or whatever. And so I think just like baking is precise, there needs to be some precision and intentionality around what you talk about when you're baking in equity into your work. I think the most important thing, the first thing you have to be precise about is the voice of the people, right? The voice of the people who you're actually working with need to be the lead voices on this work. And this is something that frankly, I wrestle with because I'm a Black man, right? Like and we're talking about reparations work for African Americans, like so much of this stuff that this reparations program was designed to rectify hit my family as well. You know, I grew up in Michigan. We came a different path. We didn't come, although I do have a lot of family. My grandmother just didn't like Chicago for whatever reason. I don't tell many people that, but her, my grandfather's brother, man, my grandmother's sister, they all came to Chicago. So I've had a ton of family here. And, you know, the path of the families that went through in Evanston is not my path, right? So I don't get to say the way reparations work happens just because I'm a Black leader, right? For that reason, that this was not my community. The reparations work is related to some specific things that happened to Black Evanstonians. So it's not my voice. And I also need to recognize that even as a Black leader of a foundation, I'm not leading a Black organization, right? So that's another important thing to know. And I think that can be a really tricky line to walk, especially for leaders of color. And I'm not one of these folks saying like, you know, leaders of color, we need to be more careful, because I don't want to get into that game either. But I do think it's important to know that, like, just because you're a Black leader, that doesn't mean your organizational values line up with those things. That doesn't mean that you're doing an automatically better job of listening to people in the community, right? You need to be just as mindful, because frankly, in some ways, right, like I have had opportunities and privileges. And I've also, admittedly, given my age and the time I've come through, like, as leaders of color, you sometimes like make concessions to be acceptable in the white world, right? For to be accepted as a leader, to be seen as a leader through the frame of whiteness, you know, that like change the way you might approach things, right? I've tried to stay true, but I don't know. I'm sure there's some things that 22-year-old me would look at me and say, "Saw you sold out just to have this time," you know, like it probably happened a couple of times, right? And as much as I've tried to fight to stay true to my values, and so listening to people who are living in the circumstance, not assuming that they don't know, because that you know, if they're not as wealthy or as educated, that those things equal a lack of intelligence, right? Understanding that lived experience is really important, and centering that first is one of the first most important things you need to do, right? And then I think the other piece I would say that's really important is you need to balance when I would say when you lead, when you follow, and when you get out of the way, right? Like that was sort of an old sports thing we would say all the time when I was growing up playing football, basketball, or whatever, right? And there are times when you need to lead. In the case of the reparations work, our leadership is more around opening up doors that are available to us as a community foundation that are not available to the folks who lead the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston, right? So we can open doors, we can help them get into, I've gone around with former city council member to some philanthropic conferences, the AFI conference, the GEO conference. We've talked a little bit about how philanthropic organizations can support reparations, right? So that's a door that's open to me that's not open to some of our partners in this work. So we open those doors. That's a way to lead. And then the kind of following is really like making sure that when we're meeting with the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston, this is a fund. It's essentially an agency fund that we hold for no fees, but we do meet with this group really frequently. And the way they want to go is the way we go, right? It's not about us saying, well, maybe if we did it this way, maybe we did it that way. That's not reparative, right? That's pushing our lens and our power and our influence onto the vision of the people, and that's not appropriate. And then sometimes just getting out of the way, understanding that this is not our time to be involved. Like we're always there supporting, we're always there saying that this is important. We're always going to stand up when asked. But if not asked, I don't jump out in front of things. Our staff doesn't jump out in front of things, because it's our work to support, it's our work to fund, it's our work to help, to grow wherever appropriate, but it's not our work to lead. And that's really, really, really difficult, particularly for foundations, right? Like, I think, coming from a nonprofit background, we do a little bit of a better job there. But grant makers, we want to be like, we got to put this through our own funnel. We got to put this through our own definition of impact. We got to say, this is what a good program looks like. And so often we really have to think back, like, who told us that those things were right? Is it our people who we're ultimately serving, or is it our donors who happen to be very often, or the supporters? It's money from white wealth that started and founded our endowments, right? And so we're basing all of these things around what impact looks like, around those definitions, and what we want our donors and supporters, especially in the community foundation world, where we do actively fundraise more frequently than other foundations do, right? So probably took more than my 3 minutes. I know I did. I'm a preacher's kid, so sometimes I get a little long-winded.
That's okay.
But I just
kind
wanted
of don't want you to stop.
I
I kind of don't want you to stop, but I guess I should be fair, right?
I'll let it go.
I'll try. There's a lot of stuff there that I want to follow up on. I'm almost certain that the attendees do too. I think this goes back to that they, right? Who is they? And, who's telling the story, who's, setting the standards, and reflection. We don't necessarily have to do it the same way that it was done before, especially if it's not working. So on that note, the question I have for Juanita is, how do you create equity for students from marginalized groups to facilitate their career awareness and success by wrapping them with love to get them through their programs? For instance, the CNA programs for high school students and the criminal justice programs for police.
So it's this, I'm just listening to Saul and listening to Maria, and I know Natalie, and so it is slowly starting to become a little more emotional than what I would prefer. And even I was not taken aback, but Jose, I called you Luis, and then I felt bad, and then I went back to Jose, and then Maria wrapped it up and said, no, it's Jose Luis. I'm like, perfect, this is good. I got the name down right. But I am one generation removed from poverty, I think, right? I watched my mother, who was a teen mother, figure it out. We used social services in our community. We used, back then it was called food stamps. We lived in what in our community was called scatter site housing, but in other communities is housing based on income. And so when I think about creating equity and opportunity for students, it's similar to what you were saying, Jose Luis, it's for, and Maria, it's for us, right? It's not created from this perspective of I'm doing this for them. It is created for those who are in our community who have similar circumstances, Black, white, blue, green, gay, straight, whatever it is, who need an opportunity to become and envision something very, very different than what they've been given. Saul took time, which was perfect, because he talked about the voice of the people. That is my job and my task. I am supposed to interpret, understand, and create a bridge from those who look and sound and feel like they are not being heard, who want more, who are capable of more, and who can do the work, but not in the systemic way that it has already been created. And that's the question. Who created it and why does it have to be the way that it is? So what foundations allow me to do, what working with Community Foundation allows me to do, what working with the Buffett Foundation allows me to do is to recreate, based on the voice of the students, impactful programming that would allow them to shift the trajectory of their life, because that was what was done for me. We talked about, Saul, you talked about opening doors. I'm able to be at some of the tables. I'm able to be at some of the tables that our young folks and our adults in our community will never have access to. It then becomes my job to be that advocate and to be truly authentic. Because I'm just like Saul, sometimes we question, like, I don't know if y'all know, but I'm Black. And when I show up, I only show up as a Black woman. That's it. I ain't got nothing else. It's gonna be this way from now to the day I die. And so the question becomes, how do I show up in that space and be truly authentic to who I am, to represent and support and create programming for those who live in a space where they don't have access and opportunity? So when he talked about open doors, that is what programming does. So when people say, no, students can't do it, sure we can. We can build a 6-week residential CNA program, and you know what happens? 7 out of 7 complete, and 7 out of 7 can go to work, and 7 out of 7 now have something different to shift the legacy and the trajectory of their life. It is a tangible skill that will last forever. This work allows us to do the hard thing. So whether it's building a law enforcement boot camp to connect our students, Black, white, male, female, even in the midst of everything we have going on, our job is to do the hard and challenge the current narrative of that is not a field you want to go into. Healthcare is not a field you want to go into. Education is not a field you want to go into. Sure it is. In the past 12 months, we've created through the Institute 5 teachers. You know where they are? They're teaching or they're in TA positions in our community here. And so how do we do that? It's exactly what he said. You listen to the voice of the people and remove yourself out of the way. My job is the advocacy. It is not to say, let's keep it. My job is also to disrupt the current system. Never goes over well, but it's all right. As long as I wake up tomorrow, we're still living. So that's my task, to figure it out.
Wow, is all I can say. At least the first thing I can say. It's very rare that I'm speechless. Natalie, if you don't mind, I just need a minute here before I get to you. Juanita, if we were there in person, I would have given you a hug because I wanted to show you that you're not alone. I think it's funny that many of our stories align so well because I could see myself in the stories I'm hearing, and my experiences, and it hurts, and it is frustrating, and sometimes it can be depressing and demoralizing, but sometimes it can be very fulfilling and very happy and inspiring when we can see the successes. So I think it takes a certain strength to recognize we are emotional, we are impacted. So we shouldn't downplay that impact. We should identify it, process it, and then address it if it needs to be addressed. So if you want to cry, go ahead. I will send you a virtual tissue or meet you at a Starbucks if you're here in Springfield, and we can do it together because you're not alone.
I'm coming over to Springfield to meet you.
I'll meet you right out. Give me 3 hours. We're almost finished. With that said, Natalie, I think that the order is perfect. And I have to give you credit for the word bake. So that was her. And I'll give her credit for this. But through the Community Foundation of Macon County, Natalie is leading efforts to foster and enhance social equity, diversity, and inclusion throughout the nonprofit sector. By making social equity, diversity, and inclusion critical elements of funding policies and requirements. And when I heard about this, I thought it was phenomenal. Her efforts have grown beyond just racial diversity to include diversity of all types, including race, gender, residence, including those zip codes, thought, ability, disability, etc. Intersectional identities, she recognized, at least she shared with me, does present challenges. For instance, even people of different races might still be very similar in other ways, such as in terms of academic pedigree, in the way that they think and process and approach issues. So questions about defining and measuring or quantifying diversity are important, and how we collect this data, because a lot of it is self-reported, is also extremely important. Prefaced by that, Natalie, I'll ask you the following. Having to start somewhere, you started with racial diversity. What support do you provide organizations in your community to support their diversity efforts? And do you think it's enough?
Ooh, I don't think it'll ever be enough. I think the emotion of my co-panelists, you can hear it. And when you get past, at least for me, because like Sol, I'm not a proxy for every white woman, nor is he for every Black man, but there's anger. And so I bring that anger and I channel it, and then I challenge my colleagues here in the nonprofit sector. And I will tell you, for our foundation, we took a stance to not fund boards that did not show diversity, racial, in the composition of their trustee panel. So we started there because obviously I could look at a list, I could go into a room and I could see who was there, and I most certainly could see who was not there, right? I could see that we were still 88% all white led for all of our nonprofits. And so, you know, I read a lot, I listen a lot, and sometimes you can't find your way and you've just got to go out and do what you feel on your heart, which is what you're hearing today. And so we pulled back all our funding and asked them, if you can say that's really what we did, we told them, right, if they want funding from us, they have to diversify their board. We started with racial, and I know that opens a lot of conversations. Is that creating tokenism? Am I asking Black people to shelter a white CEO? I hope not, but I knew we needed to bring other voices community members, the people they're serving on these boards. So we're 2 years into the process. I still have a couple boards that are all white. They do not get funding from us. And we're seeing a lot of progress. We now, as I mentioned earlier, we have leadership, sat on hiring panels. We have seen changes on the racial equity piece. And now we have to move into the other areas of diversity, but they all connect. And we're just trying to empower this community. I will share with you, there are other community foundations trying to, you know, I think it's funny when we say the system is broken, right? We're trying to fix the system. It's not. Destroy the system. The system doesn't work at all. It's not broken, it doesn't work. And so how do we as funders come in and say, find a new way, bring the community into your community foundation, empower the nonprofits to have leaders that reflect who they're serving. So I want to share with you the Kalamazoo Community Foundation last year did an open call to seek 2 board trustees. That is beautiful. They said to their community, who wants to be on this board and why? Because often when you see these power boards, our circles aren't wide enough. We aren't intentional with who we ask. And Kalamazoo's put it out there to the whole community, and they are a power foundation. And in January, they just seated 2 new trustees, and they were both Black, and they were doctorates, and they hold doctorates, and they were on fire for their community. And then in Indianapolis, where we see so much come out of, for our sector, a lot of powerful things come out of Indianapolis. I want to share that there is a group called the Mosaic Fellowship. And again, this is a pilot program. It started in 2020, and they cultivate board members, and they are matchmakers, but here's the kicker. They provide $10,000 to the trustee they sit for each of the nonprofits they work with. So they not only provide education and the match, they provide resources so that the person they bring to the table has a little bit of financial ability to impact immediately, okay? Now there's pushback to all that, right? Because really we don't have a roadmap to follow. We're trying to erect change right away. And so is that a good thing or not? I mean, you end up in these spots where we take a step forward, and then I'm afraid sometimes I take 2 steps back. But we're, like Juanita said, we are authentic, and we're really trying to change our communities.
Again, I'll start with wow. Let me stop saying as well, because you know I can say a lot more. We have a bunch of other questions that I'd like to ask the panel, but I want to make sure that we have enough time for audience members to ask a question. What I'm going to do now is just ask all panelists a question that you can respond to very briefly, so that the whole thing takes about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we still have enough time for the audience engagements. Unfortunately, most of my conversations have been with Natalie, because I haven't had time to reach out to the other panelists and engage them and learn more. And I will soon, trust me. But I know that there is an issue based upon what I heard about the types of data necessary to foster and enhance social equity, diversity, and inclusion in our communities. Right, a lot of it might be self-reported, so there are issues there. There are issues with the repository, where is it located, et cetera, et cetera. So because we have this platform, and because this particular presentation will be recorded and thus available to others outside, I want to make sure we get you what you need so that you can do the work that you need to do. And given the diversity of our audience, someone here now or someone watching the video might be able to help and inform. So what kinds of data challenges do you have in terms of identifying or further understanding what the problems are, so that you can come up with solutions, in terms of developing metrics so that you can assess impact? So anything pertaining to the kinds of data to support your efforts in terms of data collection, mechanisms for data storing, mechanisms for analysis. Now I'll give you 30 seconds to a minute to share so that we can try to help you. You are helping our community, so we got your back.
So I would say
Anyone can go first.
I would say for reparations work, the hardest thing is, I mean, we know that these things happen, but so often to create it like that, there have been atrocities committed against really all people of color in America, but we're focusing on African, reparations to the Black community here. And those atrocities are difficult to catalog, right? And to really understand. There are some folks doing the work across the country that are looking at lineage-based, reparations for slavery. Evanston's reparations are based upon redlining, but some are looking at lineage-based. And if you've done any Black genealogy work, you know that you can only go back so far, and you can't even track. Like my family lived in Clarksdale, Mississippi, home of King and Anderson Plantation. My last name is Anderson, and I can't find a link to that plantation. Like, duh, that's where we were, but I can't I can't prove it. So that kind of like diving into the history there is really, really difficult. And so just more research into helping uncover things, like support for research to uncover things like looking through Black cemeteries and, death records and those sort of things. Like, it sounds a little bit morbid, but like the genealogy piece is really, really the key to reparations work. And it's a huge key to unlock, because not only are the records, but like many of these places were desecrated, right? There are Black cemeteries that people have dug up and turned into, condominium developments in our country today. So like, it's really tough to track, but there needs to be more preservation of Black history in America and more record keeping. And we have a great resource here, Shorefront History Center, that traces the Black history of Evanston. And we need more seeding for those types of places in communities all across the country.
Thank you so much, Sol. Other panelists? Natalie, you unmuted?
Yeah, I didn't know if Maria was. I will say, we just saw a report come out earlier this week from the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and it said that only 41% of Americans said they would stop supporting a charity that tolerates discrimination. And I was like, why isn't that 100%, right? What data are we collecting, and what sector is saying that we would ever tolerate discrimination at a charity? And so that, I feel like we're on the street and we're trying to get, we take all the surveys and we do everything and we try and participate. And how do we get that feedback back? How do we learn what we should be, what the data says actually? And then on the flip side of that, when I'm working with trying to have people embrace all types of diversity, and Professor, this is a lot of what you also discuss in your writings and your papers. So much of it is unseen, right? And so much of it is not something that they either self-declare, or it's not a diversity I'm aware of. And then how do I get my community to open to that, when we really aren't even able to discuss racial diversity yet? And now I'm saying, we need to add more. And at some point in that whole conversation, when we keep adding, we have D, E, I, and A, and when are we going to stop adding all the letters after that and just say, we're all here? Why don't we celebrate our differences? And what data is ever going to show that?
Oh, I wish we could answer that.
So I think, thank you for this question, and had to take a deep breath for a moment on this, because as we think about data and what we're collecting, how much of it do we really need? Like, what do we really need to show impact? And data has shown, speaking of data, what we're hearing from our grantee partners, or just overall, so Bill Peck led organizations, so organizations led by people of color, Black and brown folk, for the most part, are the ones are the ones who feel that there is more demand on requests for them, right? And those of us who have been in the nonprofit sector kind of get it. I mean, I recall I was before my work. I worked in the museum sector for early on in my career, and it was a museum that was in the community. And I recall that museum that was the National Museum of Mexican Art, at that time Mexican Fine Arts Center Museum, versus an Art Institute of Chicago. And the kind of relationships, going back to relationships that were in place with the Art Institute of Chicago with major funding networks, they made a phone call and got a pretty substantial grant. The Mexican Fine Arts Center Museum didn't have that. So when we think about Bill Pack-led organizations, don't necessarily have those kind of relationships. I think the onus is on philanthropy to build those relationships. I think we need to ask them, what is it that for you is considered impactful? What are you trying to collect? So the data that we're asking for our grantee partners, even from a reporting perspective, we're now giving people a choice. You can write a report, or we can just do a video chat or a site visit and have a conversation about how things are going, and continues conversations on who we are. But if there is such inequity in what we are asking for from organizations, that we create all sorts of loops. Now, on our side, what do we really need? What do we really need to show that we're moving, that we are making progress, is a whole other conversation that doesn't require all of the hoops that we've had nonprofits go through.
Yeah,
That's
I want you to go on forever because this is really, really important, but we got to be fair. Juanita, your response, and then we can try to squeeze in a question or two from the audience. Audience members, feel free to mention it in the chat, and because you registered, I could always follow up since I should be able to access your email.
Yeah, I'll be super duper brief in that. I use data for me personally to make decisions. I don't sit on boards. And so if folks make an inquiry regarding, will you participate on our board? Well, I look at the board composition, right, which is an informal analysis. And then I also look at the direct reports of the head of the organization, because even if the board is diverse, and what I found is if the board is not diverse, neither are the folks that work there, right? And so that's a collection of information for me that I can make an informed decision, because even if I love maybe some of the work, what I'm not going to do is lend my value to a board. And this is what I've shared with one of them, that, oh, well, we're really trying to diversify the board. You absolutely are, but talk to me about your organization that has all men. You're not interested in my voice, right? And so I use data and information collection to make a better and informed decision, but I also use it even in terms of program development and ensuring that we access funds and opportunities for programming. Like if an organization is, and we're working with a hospital here in town, has a staff that is largely not diverse, and not only in ethnicity, but definitely in age as well, how do we look at this different, and how do we make this better? Because that means that if I'm preparing 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, but your organization is largely 40, 50, and 60-year-olds, how do we build this? And so I don't use it, and I'm not interested in providing it for punitive or for that perspective of making judgment, but definitely developing a deeper and a better understanding. But that is also that degree from UIS in math and statistics.
Thank you. Much appreciated. There is a question in the chat, but I can, let me see if I can summarize it. Okay, so briefly, I know that many foundations are taking an inward look to get their own house in order. Did your organization begin internally or externally or both? This question is from Catherine.
The foundation is half people of color and half not. I think we're about to now be, there's a few new board members coming on. There will be majority people of color. We are representative of our region. So I think once we had that in place, we obviously once we had our strat plan in place based on values, we understood the importance of making that possible. So it's a great question. I think we need to get our own house in order as well.
We are going to be kicked out shortly in about 2 minutes. Any other questions that we can address very quickly, or should I take this moment to thank our wonderful panelists for sharing their stories, giving voice to the voiceless, and letting us know how we might be able to continue to help.
Can I just share one other thought there? I just wanted to say that this is like really hard and messy work. And sometimes if you got to get the inside and the outside together at the same time, like that's okay. I think we so often wait for like perfection. Another process of like white dominant thinking that shows up in our organizations, that you can't do the work if you're not perfect. Like you can see what's wrong in your community and just go out and try to fix it. You don't have to be perfect to do the work. So I just wanted to put that there. I mean, I think it's good we should all be getting our own house in order, but if it's not all the way there, challenge your whole community together. We're all part of an ecosystem, like all work on it as a community.
I would just add to that, as an educator, I have to believe people can learn, and I am a lifelong learner, and I know we have to start somewhere, as noted by the efforts of our panelists. So it won't be perfect, period. But you can strive to make continuous improvements. Anyone else like to share or comments before we get kicked out? We have about 30 seconds left.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I look forward to following up with each of the panelists after, and to seeing everyone throughout the other sessions. You can now leave this room and enter the main room. And I think there might be a break in between this and the next plenary session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.